Page 5, initiatives workload. And this is the governor's proposal.
This was a proposal from January to implement SB 1253, which made some modifications to the initiative process, mainly to shorten an initial public review process, I think to really avoid the filing of multiple of the same initiatives that have slightly different components. This is the admin for the implementation of this initiative at the Department of Justice, and this is consistent with the estimates that were made when the bill was going through the process.
Thank you. And this is the result of Senator Steinberg's SB 1253.
Anita Lee with the Legislative Analyst's Office. So the Assembly approved the governor's proposal as budgeted. The Senate took a different action, approved one position and the associated $114,000 from the general fund. We would recommend the Senate version because we believe that the request for the remaining positions are premature at this time, given the fact that it was implemented in January of this year, as well as the fact that the new amendment process that's proposed as part of this has been used, there's been low use of it to date.
Very good. So the Senate proposal relative to the governor's would save $606,000 general fund dollars.
Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts from the committee? Okay. We're going to keep that open for now. Page 6 is Armed Prohibited Person System. Senate proposal. Ms. Lee.
Absolutely. So for a little bit of context, the legislature was concerned with the backlog related to the apps or the Armed Prohibited Person System. And so in 2013, there was funding, about $24 million that were approved for a 3-year period. And so the positions in 15-16 and the funding in 15-16 are still part of that action that was taken. So the Senate essentially said, the Senate proposed converting the 22 limited term positions to permanent and providing limited term funding essentially. Directing a portion of the appropriation from the DROS account, $250,000 of it, to notify individuals of their status on the apps list. The Senate also adopted trailer bill language that would make law enforcement grants that are administered by BSCC contingent on the fact that they demonstrated that they were up to date on their apps entry, as well as included kind of a minimum level of staffing within the department. And then finally, the last piece was SRL, which you'll be hearing at a later date.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lee. Ms. Bosler.
We're comfortable with the Senate's action here.
Very good. Thank you. So just to give a little background for folks, you may remember that it came to light past couple of years that we have about 20,000 people in very rough numbers, or had 20,000 on a list of armed prohibited persons. We're the only state in the country that has a database that allows us to be able to check whether someone has a felony on his or her record, or dealing with mental health issues, or a restraining order which would make them prohibited from possessing a firearm. After having suffered some severe cuts to her staff at the Department of Justice in 2011, the Attorney General came to the legislature with a proposal to be able to access some dealer's record of sale account, otherwise known as the DROS account, to invest in apprehending those weapons from the prohibited persons. That account is filled with $19 of a $24 registration fee when one registers a firearm for the purpose of being background checked. So that is still in process. There have been some reviews of how those dollars have, and then subsequently, once we made the statutory change, the Department of Justice requested $24 million from the fund to apprehend the weapons. So that's been ongoing for a year now. We had a review of it recently. Our subcommittee held a hearing, and that number, there has been significant success. We're down, I think, to about 16,000 now. The challenge is that on the natural, the list grows by thousands every year also. So it's a growing mountain, and we're trying to chip it down all at the same time as it grows. Senator Anderson pointed out in particular that we could certainly attend to that growing mountain if we notified folks that they were prohibited and that they should not be in possession. So that's $250,000 in this proposal. There's no new money in this. This $6 million is a part of the 24 we've already appropriated out of the DROS account. So we're not taking any money, additional money out of the DROS account. But the reason for, and this came out of Senator Hancock's hearing as well, that we heard from the Department of Justice, one of their challenges is that we had given them so many additional limited term positions. So they're hiring people who then, once they get into the Department of Justice spends a good amount of money and time training them as to how to apprehend these weapons. You can imagine that they're like small SWAT teams because they're knocking on people's doors and asking for their weapons back from people who shouldn't have them. It's a dangerous business. But once they get into the department, knowing that they have a limited term position, they then go get another job at the Department of Justice, and they're bleeding the talent that they've trained. So this would convert those limited terms to permanent, and that's the story behind this. Senator Hancock and Senator Anderson did some good work on this. So
we accept the Senate's proposal, so I move
Okay.
the Senate proposal.
sounds good. So we have a motion for the Senate proposal, and that would be 2-1, 3-0. Senator Nielsen.
Just let me be clear. The issue was that the limited term or permanent positions. My understanding was the Department of Justice made them limited term on their own. It was not required that they do so. That was their choice.
Ms. Lee.
The positions are limited term because the funding is limited term. And so the proposal, maybe for a little bit of point of clarification, so the Senate action in terms of making the positions permanent and having the limited term funding is kind of consistent with the administration's proposal related to civil service, which I believe you heard yesterday in conference.
Okay, I got it.
Which I think makes good sense.
Yes, yeah, Senator Leno, Chairman Leno, you articulated our proposal related to that point exactly. And when we have these limited term positions, often people spend a lot of energy and resources bringing people in and then training them. And then, I mean, it's obviously a very self-interested position. You want to move to a permanent position as quickly as you can because you don't have the certainty that the limited term position will continue. And so for that reason, that's why across the board, we're proposing to move away from limited term positions. It doesn't mean that there isn't short-term workload and we would have limited term funding. Departments would have to manage to their funding level. So that may mean that if they have a retirement, they're not going to fill behind that retirement in order, if they have to meet a ramp down of their funding.
Linda says a comment.
Yes, Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make note of, and perhaps you can comment on the fact that in 2013, DOJ was given $24 million to address this backlog. And 2 years later, in 2015, they've spent 40% of the money that they were given, and they've only gotten through 17% of the backlog. So, I do have some concerns that they, whether it's a limited term position or full-time position, that they're just not moving with the expediency that we would all like to see, given the money that was appropriated to help them specifically with that backlog.
Yes, I think this is really a ground zero where limited term positions can sometimes be very damaging to a department's ability to recruit and retain staff, especially when it requires a lot of training. So it takes several months to get the individual up to speed. And by that time, they may have already identified a permanent position elsewhere in the department or elsewhere in state government. And clearly, I can't fault them for wanting to move on to a permanent position. So this is really sort of a ground zero example about how limited term positions can inhibit the ability of government to actually do the things that they were that are proposed to be done, that may be a short-term nature, but the short-term staffing resources sometimes do not, they don't allow us to retain the staff that we need to get the job done.
And that, that makes sense. I understand that certainly would make it difficult for any organization, but I would just I think we should all take note of that, perhaps that's a management issue where, you would not want to, we certainly don't want the Department of Justice continually putting limited-term people on a job that's so important that they're getting, funds appropriated specifically to do. That just doesn't make sense to me from a management level to run your department like that. So just for context for future discussions about this, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, thank you, Assemblywoman. So we do have a motion for the Senate proposal, 3-0 on the Senate side, 3-0 on the Assembly side. And we're going to go back to 2 pages where we took some votes so we can get a final count. So the first page is 2. The motion was for the Assembly version. It's 2-1 on the Senate side, and on the Assembly side, it was 2.
I'm gonna go up on that one.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
3-0 on the Assembly side. And then the only other vote is page 4. We have the Assembly version. We already have a 3-0 on the Senate side and 3-0 on the Senate side, on the Assembly side? Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, she'd already voted.
Yeah, 3-0 both sides. Assembly version, page 4. Okay, great. We're on to page 7, card room licensing workload.
This was a proposal from our January budget to address a backlog of card room and third-party provider applications. This is one where we actually did propose limited-term positions in January because we were still utilizing that policy, and so it's appropriate to convert them to permanent positions, but with limited funding. So the funding would only be available for 3 years, I believe. So we do support the Senate's position here.
Very good. And Ms. Lee?
We would recommend the Assembly version. It does not appear to us that there's sufficient ongoing workload to require the 12 permanent positions. And so we think it would be better to have the 2-year limited basis, work down the backlog a little bit, and then determine at that time what the ongoing need would be.
And just for point of fact, if they had been left at limited term, you'd still be opposed?
I'm not quite clear on the question. I'm sorry if you could.
So the Senate modified the governor's proposal by making the limited term positions permanent with
Yes.
limited funding. If we had just left them as limited term,
Yes.
you would have still been opposed.
No. Our concern is we think that the position should be limited term positions.
Okay, but permanent positions with the limited funding?
We think that it's more appropriate to, in this case, to match the authorization of the positions to authorization of the funding. We are unaware of, we haven't been made aware of similar difficulties recruiting for these positions as were identified in other positions.
We need a term for that. Is leakage a good one? But you don't see it happening with card room licensing work?
We weren't made aware of it, but if there's other information available.
Right.
Yeah, and we would just note that this is not as acute of an issue as the last one, because the last issue do have a peace officer classification, so that makes it even more acute. But in this case, these are still positions where it routinely takes 6 to 12 months to fully train somebody to be able to do this workload. And so, I think we could have a difference between whether it takes 3 years or 2 years to work down the backlog, but would still appreciate a permanent position with a short-term
With
funding
limited
source.
funding. So potentiality for leakage. All right. Assemblywoman Weber.
We move the Senate's proposal.
All right, so we have a motion for Senate, and on the Senate side, we have 3-0. On the Assembly's, I'm 2-1. 2-1. Comment, Senator Nielsen, go right ahead.
Well, I'm almost to vote no, but maybe not quite, but I'm getting to no. It may look like a small thing. We're permanent positions with limited funding. We're front-loading the budget position by position. I'll vote for this, but I'm starting to dig in a little bit. If we're going to do permanent positions, we better make sure that those positions are justified and fund them. It comes back and, we've seen it again and again and again. We just pour millions of dollars for backlog. Backlog never gets better. we keep having pressure for more employees. That's of concern to me, that's all.
Thank you.
And
So-
that's why we're proposing to pair this policy change with a biannual review where we baseline every department's budgets to ensure that the funding is there for the authorized positions that they have. And also, it's a truth in budgeting because we'll be able to adjust budgets to reflect what's actually going on out in the field. Another thing that has routinely happened in many departments is that many departments have left positions vacant because they do have increased costs in other areas of their budget that have not been properly budgeted for. So this would allow for more transparencies when pairing it with this biannual rebasing.
I can agree, see that logic, but what happens to the position? Is the person fired? What do we do when we don't have the funding? Do we fire someone, or do we redirect them in the agency to another slot?
The departments have to manage to their positions. So to the extent that somebody leaves, somebody retires, if they have a limited funding situation, like in the last two examples, they would have to manage their position authority appropriately. And so they wouldn't necessarily be doing new exams to bring in new people when they knew that they were going to have to ramp down in the number of positions that they have.
I just wish the agencies, plural, were so responsible. In my experience, they aren't, but that is what it is.
Ms. Bosler, also, we haven't touched on the fact of, and if you can, or Ms. Lee, address the impact of attrition. So we have folks leaving state government all the time as well.
Yes, exactly. And so, I mean, it's really something that should be happening right now, but I think even more accountable structure is really taking a look at how their money is being spent. You know, are they consistently leaving significant positions vacant? I know, having worked on budgets for a lot of years, one of our budget analyst tricks is always looking at the number of vacant positions that a department has, because those are generally funded positions unless there's been some error, and so the money is in their budget. Often departments are using those monies for other expenditures, which may be absolutely legitimate expenditures that they have not been budgeted on or budgeted for. And so the idea behind this policy change is really to kind of delink the limited term position concept because it's not very useful for departments. People do not want to be hired into limited term positions. They immediately try and move to a permanent position. And so what happens is that often many limited term positions stay vacant, and those monies generally are being used in other parts of the budget, maybe to pay for other personnel service costs. We generally fund at the low step of a position. Obviously, not every person in state government is at that low step of their position, so sometimes monies are being used to just cover general employee compensation costs, and sometimes they're being used to cover increased rent costs or increased utility costs that were not adjusted in their baseline budget. So I think that every 2-year rebasing that we're proposing would provide significant more transparency than we currently have about how the state operations budgets are operating.
I think you're moving in the right direction. Did you have anything else to add? Okay, so we do have a motion. It is the Senate version. It is 3-0 on the Senate side and 3-0 on the Assembly side. Thanks, Brady. Page 8 is IT staff augmentation. And we do have a governor's proposal. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, this was a proposal we made in January to increase funding for the state treasurer's office to upgrade some of their information technology staffing. They're in the midst, as many state departments are, in implementing our new fiscal system. And through the implementation of that effort, there was some deficiencies that were revealed. And so we supported these additional positions, and we are comfortable with the Senate's action here.
Yes.
Legislative Analyst's Office. This is Helen Kirstein. So as was noted by Ms. Bosler, the difference between the two houses is that the Assembly approved 2 IT support positions on a limited term basis, whereas the Senate approved those on a permanent basis. We're recommending going with the Senate approach because we felt like there was some ongoing workload in terms of IT support in this area. I'll also just note that both houses approved some of the positions for data and government transparency on a limited term basis as well.
And then here, we are okay with the limited term funding, but again, the same issue as the last 2 issues with the permanent positions.
We're good. We're good. We move the Senate version.
All right. Yes, Senator Nielsen, are we okay on this one? 3-0 on the Senate and 2-1 on the Assembly. Thank you. Page 9 is position authority for Chief, the California Hub for Energy Efficiency Financing Program. And this is a governor's proposal.
This is also a proposal from January. These were additional resources and positions to support the California Hub for Energy Efficiency Financing, which is a relatively new energy efficiency program being administered by the California Alternative Energy and Advanced Transportation Financing Authority that's within the Treasurer's Office. We're comfortable with the Assembly's action, but I would just note that both houses adopted trailer bill language related to the Public Utilities Commission that we do have ongoing concerns about, and will continue to work with your staff as we work on trailer bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Ross Brown with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We recommend going with the Assembly version. We think the workload associated with the oversight of the loan program justifies both positions and at least 1 permanent position.
And again, we would prefer the limited term funding, but permanent positions.
I'm a little split myself at this point on these, so it's okay, leave it open, just give it a little more thought. All right. Yes, Assemblywoman.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make a quick comment?
Of course.
Since we're going to leave it open. So the CPUC created this program and directing ratepayer funds to pay for it, which they're not supposed to do.
Yes.
And now they want us to fund it. Do I understand that correctly?
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, so these funds are coming from PUC, from ratepayer funds, and it's being directed towards CATFA to administer the program, and then CATFA is asking for authority to spend those funds.
Because it's authority they do not have right now, right?
The program was authorized, or the authority to spend the funds for the chief program was authorized last year. This is sort of an update to the expenditures for the administration of that program.
Okay, so it's my understanding that the legislature would have to approve the use of these ratepayer funds to go to these programs, and it's also my understanding that that was not done. Is that correct?
I believe the issue is the legislature has not approved the authority to sort of collect the funds from ratepayers.
So the answer is yes, then?
What the legislature is approving is the authority to sort of spend the fund, the CATFA to spend the funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Yes, Senator Nielsen.
Well, but didn't the department go ahead with the program without authorization of the legislature? Now they're coming and saying, pay for it, right? It's off the books.
So the Public Utilities Commission has broad authorities in their regulatory role over the investor-owned utilities. And sometimes part of that role is collecting ratepayer monies that will be specifically used for things like energy efficiency and renewables. These monies were specifically, there was an interest in having a low-interest financing program. The Treasurer's Office has many of those programs, and so those monies were proposed by the PUC initially to be directed to the Treasurer's Office for this very specific program that is only to benefit the investor-owned utility service areas. Last year, we proposed putting the expenditure authority at the Treasurer's Office, because clearly the PUC can transfer the monies there, but the Treasurer's Office can't spend those monies until there's an appropriation. And so last year we did propose for the first time an appropriation for this program, and that was approved. This year we're going back and refining the proposal and adding additional staffing to support the program.
And you're seeking in the trailer bill the statutory language then to approve the program by the legislature now? It is not currently approved by the legislature, so it would be prospectively approved?
The collection of the revenues is part of the Public Utilities Commission's purview and proceedings. This is just a small piece of that money that's being used for a specific program that the Treasurer's Office has specific expertise related to low-interest financing of energy efficiency projects. And so this was just really a technical transfer to an existing state government entity that has similar type programs and can administer the funds.
Yeah. I think the point is taken that it's not been approved by the legislature, that's all.
Senator Nielsen, that is indeed a concern. Mr. Brown, so in 2013, after the CPUC did go out and create a number of nonprofits, and we subsequently learned that there was potential conflict of interest in the development of those nonprofits, that the legislature then restricted their ability to do that without legislative prior approval. We did that in 2013?
I believe that's correct. I apologize, I wasn't around at that time, but that sounds about right.
And then last year, in the current year budget, we included expenditure authority to enable Kate Foote to serve as the administrator of Chief, but funded directly from the IOU.
Correct.
Not ratepayers. No, through the ratepayer funds.
Ratepayer funds,
Right.
correct. Yeah.
Not from the CPUC. Was that in any way circumventing the restrictions that we had set on them?
I don't. I think that's just something that I would have to look into a little bit more. Okay. I don't know that.
I think on both sides we need a little bit more clarity.
Sure.
So it is open. So we are on page 10, and we are dealing with a delay in loan repayment to Renewable Resource Trust Fund. And this is administration proposal.
Yes, so one thing that we routinely are doing is evaluating the existing loans, special fund loans that the state has taken out to manage through the very difficult recession. We've paid back a significant portion of special fund loans and proposed to pay well over $1 billion back as part of our Proposition 2 payment in this budget. This is one where we did adjust the loan. Our policy has been, in terms of loan repayments, is really to evaluate what the program needs are. And so this adjustment to delay repayment was based on what the program needs are for this specific program. And so this repayment schedule is consistent with program needs.
And Mr. Brown.
And just for clarification, the Assembly adopted the governor's proposal to delay the loan repayment, and the Senate rejected the proposal. We recommend the Assembly version. We think the proposed delay is reasonable given the condition of the two funds.
Thank you. I think our subcommittee didn't take action out of concern for the fund stability, and we subsequently did get information that there's no need for concern, as you've just stated. Senator Lara? Yes. We do have a motion for the Assembly version. On the Senate side, we are 3-0, and on the Assembly side, we are 3-0. Thank you.